Hello Brain Shakers, welcome to the Brain Shakers Academy. Your host here, Brave Alistair. In today's session, we're looking at the second stage of labor. Now, we have already started looking at the entire process of labor, and so I've done a couple of videos on the process of labor. And if you haven't seen those videos, head on to my YouTube channel, which is the Brain Shakers Academy, and make sure you watch those videos. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button and drop me comments as well. I would like to hear what you think. And so in today's session, we're looking at the second stage. Now, let's quickly get into the second stage and then see what the physiology looks like in the second stage. So within the second stage here, we understand that we already have the uterine action that is coming from the first stage. Now, the contractions are already happening, and the contractions are already becoming expulsive, and they are becoming more expulsive within the second stage and even lasting a little bit longer, but then reducing in frequency. Why? Because the duration obviously is going to be longer than they were in the first stage of labor. And so in a short space of about 10 minutes, you have only a fewer contractions, and those contractions will be more intense because now it is the time to get that baby out. And we also did make mention that the second stage of labor, by definition or in terms of time frame, we said that this is a stage of labor from the time when the cervix is 10 centimeters dilated or fully dilated to the expulsion, that is the complete expulsion of the fetus, then now which is going to be called the baby, or to the delivery of the baby. That is the definition of the second stage. So during that second stage, we also understand that the presenting part will then be compacted into the pelvis the more, and as it is brought down into the pelvis the more in a process that we're calling descent, there is then going to be displacement of soft tissues, and one of the important soft tissues that will be displaced is the bladder. So the bladder has to be pushed out into the abdominal cavity from the pelvic cavity so that it is away from a potential injury as the fetus is going to be negotiating the birth canal. Now, during the process of labor, there are three main principles that the fetus will have to satisfy, or rather encounter. So these are the three principles. Number one principle is a principle that is called descent. So we say that descent happens throughout the entire process of labor, and by descent all we mean is the presenting part having to come more lower into the pelvis, meaning that throughout those contractions, the contractions are pushing the fetal head or the presenting part further into the pelvic cavity, and that is descent. Principle number two is about rotation. Now, when we are talking about rotation, as the presenting part is being pushed into the lower portion or the pelvic cavity, it comes into contact the pelvic floor muscles. So when it comes into contact with the pelvic floor muscles, that applies some resistance to it. And because of that resistance, the resistance then forces the presenting part to rotate forwards until it comes to lie under the symphysis pubis. So that is principle number two. Then principle number three is about pivoting, meaning that anything that is going to emerge out of the pelvis will come and pivot under the subpubic arc or the pubic bone. So those are the three main principles that will have to be satisfied by a fetus before it can actually be delivered. Now, as we're looking at this, we will also look at some of the main movements that the fetus will have to undergo as it negotiate the pelvic canal in order for it to then actually be delivered. I must also make mention that on this series I'm just going to be defining and looking and discussing out the main events, the main movements that are happening during the second stage of labor. And do also subscribe to the YouTube channel so that you don't miss a session where I will be talking and discussing about the actual processes that the fetus does undergo. I will do an actual demonstration using models to demonstrate on the mechanism of labor in a normal presentation, such as a cephalic presentation, where you have a position such as a left or a right occipital anterior, and I will also be demonstrating on the occipital posterior position and breech presentation. So that is more reason why you should be subscribed to the YouTube channel and hit the notification button so you don't miss any of us. Now let's look at the main movements for today. Okay, so we are calling these as the main movements. Okay, so in the movements here, this helps us know what the mechanism of labor is. And even as we discuss these movements, we'll be discussing these movements in relation to a normal presentation, which is a cephalic presentation. So number one, again, we are going to bring in the issue of descent, meaning that descent will continue to happen throughout. That is, the presenting part or the head is being brought down into the pelvis in readiness for it to then be delivered. And as we talk about descent, then we will be talking about issues to do with flexion. So if we did have a fetus in here, it folds itself in there. So that is the fetus there, and we have already done another video where we look at the general fluid pressure, that is looking at what happens in the first stage of labor. So when there is a contraction of the uterus, that exerts pressure on the hindwaters, and because the fluid in there is incompressible, that pressure that is exerted will now then be equalized onto the fetus and also onto the uterus. Now, when it is exerted on the uterus, it then gives you what we call the fetal axis pressure, meaning that the pressure will be exerted on the fetal breech there, and once it is exerted there, then it will move by way of the fetal long axis to come to the compression of the occiput, forcing the occiput to then turn inwards and be flexed, meaning that the mentum now is what is going to be on the thrust of this particular fetus, so that the smallest diameters are the ones that will be engaging into the pelvis and then distending the perineum as well, so that you minimize all those tears that one may sustain. So that is flexion, the aspect of forcing this head to have its mentum then onto the chest or the thrust of the fetus. Okay, so from the aspect of flexion there, then we will have what we call the internal rotation of the head. So we have internal rotation of the head. Now, the internal rotation of the head is just satisfying principle number 2, which means that it comes into contact with the resistance of the pelvic floor muscles, then forcing it to rotate anteriorly or forwards to come and lie under the symphysis pubis. And if you have a left occipital anterior position or a right occipital anterior position, that rotation will just be 1/8 of a cycle. But if you have an occipital posterior position, then it means it will have to rotate 3 times or 3/8 of a cycle. Now, do stay focused as well, and also remember to follow the YouTube channel and subscribe to it, because I will also be doing another explanation on the occipital posterior position in a different video. So once you have now the internal rotation of the head, what is going to follow that now is going to be receding, meaning that with the contractions that are coming in, there'll be pushing of the head down, and then the head goes back after that contraction. Again, it goes out and then comes back, goes out, comes back, goes back, and then comes back. So that is a process of receding. But when you've had the largest diameters of the fetal head being delivered, that is the biparietal diameter, which is about 9.5 centimeters. If you want to know about the fetal skull diameters, I've also done another video, so you can check that out on my YouTube channel, which is the Brain Shakers Academy. Once you've had the biparietal diameters now having the biparietal bones having been delivered, then the head will be said to have crowned. So this will be followed by a process that we call crowning. And now the head can no longer go back or recede backwards. So what is going to happen now is that the head is going to extend. The head was in a flexed position, but now because it is no longer receiving that fetal axis pressure as continuation to its occiput, it will then have the free will now to extend. And so crowning is going to be followed by a process of extension. Now, the internal rotation of the head here, which rotated it forwards to lie under the symphysis pubis, did make a twist within the neck. And so that twist, after the head has then been delivered, will have to be undone. Now, the process of correcting that twist is what we call restitution. So that will be followed by a process called restitution. So if restitution has happened, so if this fetal head had rotated in the anti-clockwise direction 1/8 of a cycle, when it restitutes after it has been delivered, it will have to rotate backwards 1/8 of a cycle towards the side where it came from. So if it did rotate from the left side, then it will have to rotate back 1/8 of a cycle, then it would have corrected the twist that was created in the neck. Then from restitution here, we're going to have internal rotation of the shoulders. So you have internal rotation here of shoulders, because the shoulders by then would have entered the pelvic cavity. And when the shoulders enter the pelvic cavity, it means that they come into contact with the pelvic floor muscle resistance, and then they are also forced to rotate forwards. And as they rotate forwards, then it means that they come to lie in the largest diameters, where you have an anterior shoulder on the upper part, and then you have a posterior shoulder also on the bottom part, and then they will facilitate the delivery of those shoulders. Now, the internal rotation of the shoulders happens at the same time with the external rotation of the head. So you have also external rotation of the head. Okay, so this is not going to create any twist, because the external rotation of the head and the internal rotation of the shoulders are happening at the same time and in the same direction. So there is not going to be any twist here that will need to be done. And once this has then happened, you have the shoulders in the AP diameter, which is the anteroposterior diameter. Then you can now have what we call lateral flexion. Okay, and by lateral flexion we mean just by the sides here, meaning that we will be able to now get the baby, apply a bit of routine axial traction, and then be able to deliver the baby onto the mother's abdomen in lateral flexion. So these are the movements that this fetus is then going to undergo for it to then culminate into a normal delivery. And so the rest of the body will then sweep the perineum and then will be delivered onto the mother's abdomen. So that's basically what is happening within the second stage of labor. It's a continuation from the first stage of labor of the uterine action and the displacement of the soft tissues, and then you have all those movements. Like I did make mention that I will be doing a demonstration or a simulation to show you on the actual movements and rotations and diameters that will be coming into contact with the pelvic cavity. Now, if you did find this video helpful and insightful in understanding the second stage of labor, don't hesitate to drop me comments in the comments section. Give me thumbs up, share the video as much as possible, and head on to my YouTube channel, which is the Brain Shakers Academy, and do subscribe to the channel. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next one.